All right. Welcome back to the 4 League Report. I'm Dan DiPietro. This is going to be an episode dedicated entirely to the New York Mets, who have fired Carlos Mendoza through 81 games after a 34-47 start. So let's take a breath, take a seat, and look at this thing from a mile high. We had both David Stearns and Steve Cohen both give statements today. Two completely different tones, two different messages to the public, but the same headline: the manager is out. A roster built to spend and not built to survive. So in this episode, we're going to, keep the receipts, the timeline, the injuries, the ledger, the clubhouse noise, and the argument at the end will be made. With the injury overlap, I'm not convinced any manager could have turned this into a contender. So let me start first by reading you the statements. This one by David Stearns. Carlos has led the organization with passion and grace and is beloved by everyone who works with him on a daily basis. Carlos's impact on our players, staff, and culture over the last 3 seasons has been transformative. Unfortunately, we know we are falling short and change is necessary to move forward. Okay. David Stearns had time to prepare this statement and chose the word transformative. Let's move on to Steve Cohen's statement. I want to express my deepest gratitude to Carlos Mendoza for his leadership and unwavering commitment. Our commitment to bringing our fans a championship caliber team has not changed. There is no sugarcoating it. This season has been a disappointment, and our fans deserve better than what we've already delivered. Yeah, the fans certainly deserve better. So, two completely different tones here. We have the GM essentially expressing pain and a deep affection for the manager. And on the other hand, you have the owner who, let's face it, he basically could have let AI write this, and this statement could have been true of any coach or manager fired since the beginning of time in any professional sport. They could have issued the same statement. So in my opinion, this was, kind of an accountability measure here by Steve Cohen. It seems to me, based on the two statements, that it wasn't a move that Stearns wanted to make, who had defended Cohen, weeks earlier when questions came up about his job security. And then, here's Steve Cohen basically with a pretty vanilla statement. And you just wonder, going forward, what is there a disconnect between Stearns and Cohen now? What can we expect by season's end? Can we expect any more changes in leadership? Can we expect a complete fire sale at the trade deadline? It's just tough to know what the Mets are going to do going forward. So the real story here lives in the ledger, the injury report, and the construction choices made by the front office. Particularly, this is David Stearns' baby. So let's go through all of it. The clubhouse chatter. Given the way the roster was built, how no manager likely had the tools to make this team successful. So you want context? I got context. You want a verdict? I'll give you one at the end. Where we were when the hires happened. So let's go back to 2023, late in 2023. David Stearns had been the architect of a very successful turnaround with the Milwaukee Brewers. He was sold by Steve Cohen as a guy that could turn this team around and make them a winner for years to come. It was a 5-year mandate to do so. And then you had Carlos Mendoza hired ahead of the 2024 season, and he delivered immediate results. This team made an NLCS run, and the city was kind of breathing a sigh of relief. The half of the city that leans Mets definitely looked like the culture was fixed. Looks like communication was fixed. The clubhouse looked healthy. Everything seemed good. Everything seemed to be on track. But the honeymoon doesn't last forever, and Stearns began reshaping the roster extremely aggressively after the collapse that they suffered last year in 2025, which was a historic collapse. And you can absolutely blame Mendoza partly for what went on last year. I think that if you were to ask 10 Met fans, 8 or 9 of them would probably blame Stearns before they blame Mendoza. But I'll give you that 2025 definitely, left some questions in regards to whether Mendoza was a serious manager in the long run for the Mets, or whether it was just a flash in the pan in the year 2024 when they made it to the NLCS. So, the payroll has been climbing. Expectations climb with that, especially in New York City. And the team that spends at the top of the sport, especially in a market like New York City, those fans are expecting a long-term and sustained winner. That should buy you plenty of depth. It should buy you essentially everything that you need to remain competitive. But Mendoza's record this year with the Mets, 34-47 through 81 games. I think Mendoza has a lot to learn as a manager. However, I don't believe that he was awful. I think that he understood that he was on a sinking ship, and I'm sure that took a toll on him. And I'm sure this is going to be, like I said, a nice growth process for him moving forward with whatever he does. I'm sure he'll get a shot at being a manager again. The ledger just doesn't match the payroll, right? So 5th in the NL East through 81 games. That's not a slump through 81 games. That's a season-defining hole. That's a complete failure from a systematic standpoint. The offense ranks 24th in Major League Baseball. That's unacceptable. The starting rotation, 3rd worst ERA in the majors. That's not just a bad week, right? And this team ranks third in total errors. Now, if you're a deep stat, metrics guy, then you'll see that they're ninth in defensive runs saved. Well, okay, but the eye test shows you that unforced mistakes have turned winnable games into blowouts, and that's why the Mets have been so poor. They just haven't been in enough ball games for them to have any kind of success. So let's take a look at the top contributors. You have Juan Soto, who's a consistent bright spot, hitting essentially 300 with an on base percentage near 400 and 17 home runs. He's been the engine. He's been the one that's produced at the level the payroll demands. He has been nicked up here and there. And then you have Bo Bichette, the hits leader, and he has 45 RBIs. Solid, not exactly lighting the world on fire, but solid. Okay, and then the one bright spot in your pitching rotation is Nolan McLean, who leads the staff with 97 strikeouts. Freddie Peralta just hasn't been good enough. And Kodai Senga has a 10.08 ERA and is now headed to the bullpen. So the Mets starting pitching is completely collapsed. Oh, and they traded David Peterson to the Chicago Cubs too. So their starting pitching is completely collapsed. They aren't getting a lot of production in the lineup. The injury overlap deal with Soto and Lindor has just been brutal. I mean, you have the calf injury that Soto had. He missed nearly 3 weeks. And then on the exact night that Soto returned on April 22nd, Lindor strained his left calf. Lindor was out for over 2 months. Lindor finally rejoined the active roster on the 24th of this month after a rehab assignment in AAA Syracuse. And then on June 23rd, Soto suffered a lower back issue and exited the game against the Cubs. And, imaging came back clean and he returned as the DH on the 25th. And then Lindor took a precautionary night off. So your two biggest superstars have not played. They've played in a total of 9 games this season. 9 out of 81 games. So, that's a season-defining overlap of bad luck and fragile depth. When your two leaders can't be on the field together, your lineup construction is constantly compromised, your batting order never stabilizes, your clubhouse leadership can't anchor the team on the field. That's a huge, huge problem. And now the reports that have been coming out for months, really dating back to 2025, but have certainly gotten louder in recent days, is the chemistry in the clubhouse is apparently awful between Soto and Lindor. These two guys have completely different personalities, different approaches, not a lot of personal communication going on. Here's the reality. Both players have publicly downplayed any rift. Lindor said they aren't best friends, but are good teammates who support each other. Soto said they've turned the page and are focused on winning. And insiders, have called the toxic divide narrative fake controversy. Well, is it fake controversy that the story is being corroborated by many different sources in the media that these two guys simply don't want to play on the same team with each other at the same time? I mean, clubhouse chemistry matters, man. And it's you don't just wave a magic wand. Two stars not being best friend. Best friends is one thing, but two stars after a while where it gets so contentious, that it makes it to the media that they don't even want to play together on the same field is obviously a big deal. So, you know, Soto's contract not going to be moved. He's the Mets' prize. Lindor, on the other hand, wouldn't be surprised if he's a deadline trade. Wouldn't be surprised if the Mets went into full fire sale mode heading into next year, looking for a complete reset with their payroll and with their entire roster. And, you know, while all these questions with the clubhouse chemistry matter, they do matter, they still don't explain a rotation with the third worst ERA and an offense ranked 24th in runs. Okay, so the ledger is the ledger. And again, this is a systematic failure. So you could blame Carlos Mendoza all you want, but David Stearns is the architect of this team. And this is, you know, not year one, not year two. You know, David Stearns has been here since 2023 now. When I say here, I mean with the New York Mets. He came in, you know, to retool and win. He made aggressive, high-cost moves. He reshaped the roster. He concentrated talent. That's the key word. He concentrated it when he first came. And in 2024, you know, the Mets went to the NLCS. And for whatever reason, after the collapse of 2025, he decided he essentially wanted to gut this team and take a whole bunch of high-risk moves on, you know, players like Robert Jr., who just can't stay healthy, who has all the potential in the world but can never stay healthy. And it's just been that in a nutshell for the Mets this year. So, you know, the bets that he made didn't mitigate risk. You know, they, in my opinion, they just increased the risk. So when Stearns praises Mendoza's culture, you know, in the statement today, and then, you know, they make the trade, the change, and fire him, whether that came from Cohen or whether that came from him, you know, he's basically signaling to you that, you know, leadership from him doesn't need to be as accountable as maybe everybody else thinks it needs to be. And I think that what happened was Steve Cohen, you know, stepped in and was like, you know, he promised accountability when he became the owner. He said that that was something that Mets fans could expect. So this was a move that needed to be made. You understand in the middle of a baseball season that the roster can't change. So the most logical thing to do is to change the management. Now, you know, what did Mendoza do well? You know, he was essentially, you know, a player who, or I'm sorry, a manager who the players really love. I mean, they publicly praised him. Stearns continuously praised him throughout his tenure. Those seem to be real things. Now, whether that translates into a clubhouse culture changer or not is a different story. It may have been too taxing on Mendoza long term to have Soto and Lindor in the same clubhouse for 2 years. But you know, for the things that Mendoza could not control, payroll allocation, roster construction, injuries, players not liking each other, you know, even the stuff that we heard about Nimmo and Pete Alonso not liking certain players in the clubhouse, you know, the performance of newly acquired high-cost players, you can manage lineups. You can try to motivate all you want. You can make any tactical decision that you want, but you can't manufacture depth. You can't reverse a payroll decision mid-season if you're the manager. So when Stearns says that the firing is a tactical change and praises Mendoza's culture work, okay, maybe he's not lying, but, then you have Cohen says fans deserve better and demands accountability. He's definitely not lying. So one of those statements is more true than the other, and both point to different parts of the problem. And that's why I'm questioning whether Stearns is the answer in New York long term. He might just not be built for New York. You can't operate a team like the Mets the same way that you operate the Milwaukee Brewers, or the same way that you would operate the Pittsburgh Pirates or the Cincinnati Reds. It just doesn't work that way. New York is a pressure cooker, man. So I think the short list of things to look out for: will David Stearns be aggressive or passive at the deadline? Will he actually trade for some depth? Will he move payroll? Will they call up more prospects, shop veterans? The trade deadline is going to tell you everything that you need to know about the direction of the New York Mets going forward. Can the Mets get anything stable amongst their starting pitching staff? Are there internal arms who can step up anywhere in the organization? Or will the bullpen be overused all summer, and will it just not matter? Soto and Lindor, how many games will they play together for the rest of the season, or until Lindor gets traded, which I would consider highly probable at this point? More than 9 games would be a start. Does the interim manager, Green, change any of the energy at all? Does the clubhouse respond? We'll have to see. Will Cohen's messaging to the fans, does it placate the fan base or does it inflame it? I have a feeling that the Mets fan base is really upset with David Stearns. I don't think that they liked Carlos Mendoza, but I don't believe that they think that Carlos Mendoza is the entire reason for the Mets' failures this year. So, you want someone to blame? I'm of the opinion that you start with the blueprint. The manager's gone. Fine. But you want a real fix? Look at the ledger, the injury list, the roster construction, which leads to all the injuries. And that's where the Mets' problems live. That's where the real accountability should land. Again, we'll be watching the trade deadline, see what's going on with Lindor. Be watching for any other front office changes to see whether sweeping changes are made or whether Steve Cohen doubles down on David Stearns, because that's what this will end up being if David Stearns survives this year. That will be Steve Cohen making the decision to double down. Thank you for tuning in to another episode of the 4 League Report. I'm Dan DiPietro. I'll see you next time.